Hey everyone, this is Ragnarok Boy. Today we'll be ranking the Final Fantasy games from 1 to 10, and to be honest with you, this is a massive undertaking. It is actually very challenging to do so. Even though I have finished all of these 10 games, I sometimes can tell which one is better than the other. I love them all equally, to be honest. So in order to do this top 10, what we're going to do is that we're going to base it entirely on gameplay mechanics, because story-wise and music-wise they are all masterpieces. They are a 10 out of 10, but gameplay-wise they have their differences, so that is what we're going to approach. So without out of the way, let's begin. So number 10, I would have to say it's Final Fantasy II, because even though it is considered the black sheep of this series, I think it's a good game, but it's got a major flaw, that is the gameplay mechanics. They are not very polished, but that is understandable. I mean, this game was released in 1988, so of course the developers were very limited. But even though it's got this flaw on gameplay, it's still a very good game. It's got a brilliant story, it's got lovely music, and actually the story is a bit dark. Some party members that join, they die throughout the game, and it's very shocking. But unfortunately, this gameplay flaw is very serious, because our characters, they don't level up, but their stats are increased separately. For example, you have to use a fire spell a certain number of times for it to rank up and for it to be stronger. And it sounds good in theory, but it was not really well executed. And sometimes it took hours upon hours to improve a specific stat, and that was a bit frustrating for me. So yeah, Final Fantasy II, number 10. So let's continue with number 9. It will have to be Final Fantasy VIII. And it is kind of upsetting, because I really enjoyed the story, the music and cinematics. They were mind-blowing, but the gameplay was just one of the weakest throughout the series. It was actually very lacking in my opinion. The magic that you get is very basic. You have to rely heavily on summons at first, and then you have to rely heavily on limit breaks, and limit breaks, they they really honored their name, because they broke completely the game. I mean, there was no strategy involved. You just used the limit breaks and that was it. At least that was my experience. So I didn't really enjoy it that much. I appreciate just a bit of a challenge, but with limit breaks there was just no challenge. Of course, you could try finishing the game without limit breaks, but that's just a bit boring in my opinion. That would make just the pacing very slow, and that's it. That is why Final Fantasy VIII is in the number 9 position. Number 8 would have to be Final Fantasy I, the game that started it all. It's truly a timeless classic. It's truly a masterpiece. I'm still impressed how the developers were able to insert such an epic story in a game from 1987. A game that is 33 years old, and still we were introduced with one of the greatest villains in JRPGs in my opinion. Man, that reveal by the end of the game, I'm not going to say exactly what I refer to, but I'm sure that everyone who's played through the game knows what I'm talking about. To know the plot behind the villain schemes, that was just magnificent. That was just... everyone should experience that moment. It was so marvelous. I'm still impressed, because Jesus, man, they were so limited. How they were able to create such a masterpiece. I'm still at a loss of words. I really have a lot of respect and love for the first game, and even though exploration is a bit clunky sometimes, because of course it's a 1987 NES game, it is still so wonderful. Everyone should give it a try. We continue with number 7, and oh my god, I hate myself for this, but it would have to be Final Fantasy 9. And oh my god, it's such a shame because this game is so lovely and so charming. It's probably got the best soundtrack of the series. It's so lovely, but man, I don't know what happened with the gameplay, but battles are so slow, and trance was also very slow. That was the limit break that was called trance in Final Fantasy 9, but it took forever to activate, and we were used to Final Fantasy 7 that limit breaks, they used to be fast, and now it takes forever, and it just didn't work for me. And I think this game was just too ambitious by the time it was released. Maybe it should have been released for the PlayStation 2. I say it was ambitious because we're using 4 party members instead of 3 that we've been using in 7 and 8. But I think we have emulators to fix that, I guess. We have mods to fix it. But the original game had this terrible issue, unfortunately. So number 6 would have to be Final Fantasy 3. I actually played the Nintendo DS version and the PSP version, which is basically the same. And man, I have to say that the developers did everything right this time. They learned from the mistakes that they had made in Final Fantasy 2. They went back to what they did right in Final Fantasy 1 and improved upon the formula. They improved the job system, and that was just God sent. That was the right thing to do. They included summoners, and that was the best decision they could have made. Gosh, I love summoners so much. And I have to say that Final Fantasy 3 is a very solid game. It is actually very, very challenging. Actually, it's got an above average difficulty. You really have to make a good strategy to progress. You really have to build your party members carefully, and that is exactly what I love to do. Battles were also they were not fast paced, but I mean they had a decent pacing, and it was really just well made. I really love Final Fantasy 3, and the job system is the absolute best. So let's continue with number 5. It would have to be Final Fantasy 7, and this might be a little bit controversial, but to be honest, in my experience, gameplay wise, it could have been better. It introduces limit breaks, but I think we get to a point that we just start abusing limit breaks, and there is not much strategy involved. Of course, the materia system is actually engaging, is interesting to level up materia and to get the different skills. I think that is very well constructed. And battles are just so fast paced, there's a lot of action, and boss battles are usually very fun. But I have to say that in general terms there is not much strategy. Most of the time we just rely on limit breaks, and yeah, that kind of breaks the game as the name implies. So yeah, that's the reason Final Fantasy 7 is in the number 5 position. So number 4 would have to be Final Fantasy 4, and oh my god, what a masterpiece. I still think the original SNES version is the best version there is. I wish I had been there to witness the release for this game. Man, it's just surreal. It's magnificent. I play it even today, and I think it's not aged a bit. It's still wonderful. The music is just out of this world. It's magnificent, and the story is just so engrossing, and I love the cast of characters. I love Cecil, I love Rydia, I love King, I love Rosa, I love Edge, and well, I don't like Edward, but you get the point. It's such a massive, it's such a great game. Boss battles are so excellent, and you play with 5 characters at the same time. That is the largest amount throughout the series. That is just so cool. That is just so great. Unfortunately, it kind of breaks the game. It makes it just a bit easier sometimes because, I mean, you're using 5 characters. That's a bit too much, but it's still so great. I enjoyed every moment I play Final Fantasy IV. It's such a timeless masterpiece. Number 3 would have to be Final Fantasy X, and I have to say I really have a lot of love and respect for this game. It was just so ambitious for the time it was released, 2001, and oh my god, still the game holds up so perfectly well. It's such a massive feat of technology. I'm still impressed. I don't know about you guys, but I think Final Fantasy X is still surreal, even by today's standards. And gameplay wise, because that's what we've been talking about, it's actually very interesting because you can use all of your playable characters in one battle. Unfortunately, not at the same time. That would have been fun. But you can swap them according to the needs that you have. If you need to strike a flying enemy, you can swap to walk and attack that enemy. If you need a magic user, you can swap to Lulu and use her instead. And Riku was also very useful with her limit and using that chemist limit break that she had. Then this game was called Overdrive, not Limit Break. And also limit breaks were balanced. They were reworked. They were really well. They were really fun to use, but they did not break the game. They were actually very balanced. You can create very strong characters if you know what you're doing at the sphere grid. Everything about this game is so well made. It's very well designed. It was made with a lot of love and dedication, and again, I have nothing but respect and admiration for Final Fantasy X. So we're almost there. Let's continue. Number 2 would be Final Fantasy VI. And oh my god, I kinda hate myself for not placing this game at the number 1 spot because it's such a grand masterpiece. It's probably the best game of this series. But as I said before, it's just so hard to name the best game of the series because there are so many great masterpieces throughout, man. But there are some days that I just say, man, Final Fantasy VI is the absolute greatest. It's got so many memorable moments. Just that intro is so simple, but it's so magic. I could never forget that moment when I first experienced it, when I saw the soldiers walking towards Narsh, and it was just so magic. I was completely stunned. I could not even blink. It was just so magic. So many special moments. The opera scene will be unforgettable. Even meeting Gao will be unforgettable. Man, it's just got so many great moments, but it's actually kind of a sad game because so many bad things happen, so many characters die, there is suicide involved. It's actually a heavy game to take some times, but still it's just a great masterpiece. Everyone should experience it at least one in their lives, whether they are a fan of JRPGs or not. It's just such a great game. But as I said before, it's not without issues. It's got a little problem in gameplay, just a little problem in gameplay. That is not really balanced in my opinion. And towards the end of the game, magic is the best command and completely breaks the game. So you just start spamming Ultima, and that's it. So yeah. If they ever remake the game, that I really hope they do, they should just rebalance a little bit the commands so they are all equally useful, and that way it would be just the perfect game. And now for the number 1 spot, dun, 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 obviously the magnificent, the one and only Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. What an absolute gem. Nah, I'm kidding. Of course not. It's Final Fantasy V. Man, this game has got such a great gameplay, man. It's the peak of gameplay mechanics in the Final Fantasy series. And I have to admit, it's not the best Final Fantasy game because, to be honest, it's got a weak story. I don't really like the story. It's just very whimsical and it's very silly and it doesn't take itself seriously, although it's got a couple of very shocking moments. But yeah, story is not the strongest point of this game. But the gameplay is just marvelous. I love experimenting with each of the jobs and just trying out different commands, and there are just so many commands that you can use. It's so entertaining, it's so fun. I just had a great time with it. I really recommend it to everybody. And unfortunately, it's a bit of an underrated game because probably the story, probably the visuals. Unfortunately, the port that was released for Android, that it didn't do it any justice. The sprites looked terrible. But definitely the best version to try this game would be the Game Boy Advance version. You can also try the extra dungeon that was included. You can try the super bosses. It's just so entertaining. If you know what you're doing with the job system, you can finish the game and you don't have to level up that much. You can finish the game under level 50, including super bosses, if you know what you're doing. And man, this game is just pure magic. It is very overlooked, and it should not be that way. It's so grand. I really loved it. I really enjoyed it. And that's it. We have now ranked the Final Fantasy games from 1 to 10. And well, I just wanted to give my personal opinion on the matter because I have played all of these games already. I have finished them all. And man, what a journey. I really recommend everyone to play each one of these games at least once because I mean they are unlike any other games. In my opinion, it's my favorite series, and man, it would make me so happy just to forget to forget everything and experience them for the first time again. So I hope you liked it. I'm sorry this was such an amateurish video. Well, I don't have much experience, but I just wanted to share my thoughts with the community. And well, please feel free to share your opinion as well. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.